Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses as we begin with Part 1, Preface and on the Ancient Mysteries, from the Freemason's Manual or Illustrations of Masonry by Jeremiah Howe. The Consummation. The Freemason's Manual or Illustrations of Masonry, containing, in addition to the rites sanctioned by the United Grand Lodge and Grand Chapter of England and Wales, the Mark and Mark Master, a full account of all the degrees included in the ancient and accepted rite, and the Knights Templar degree, with brief notices of all the rites professing to be connected with Freemasonry, by Jeremiah Howe. Preface. On commencing his undertaking, the editor intended to have adopted the title of Brother Preston's work, with such additions as English Masonry demands, but as the Illustrations of Masonry has, since the volume was put to press, been reproduced, it was but just to abandon the title originally proposed. To comprehend the entire system of the institution, a thorough acquaintance with the volume of the Sacred Law, or Holy Scriptures, and a full appreciation of the book which contains the treasures of God's revealed will, are essential. Its aim and end throughout all time has been to incite men to acts of kindness to their fellows. It recognizes no sect or creed in craft masonry, which is universal, but it requires an acknowledgement of the true and living God Most High. The first great doctrines held in sacred veneration by the order are the existence of God and the immortality of the soul, pointing its votaries to that clouded canopy where all good Masons trust eventually to arrive by faith in God, hope in immortality, and charity towards man. The next prominent doctrine is unity of mankind. It levels all those distinctions which wealth has created, making no difference but personal merit. In a Mason's lodge, the noblest peer of the realm and the poorest peasant that tills the soil, the minister who serves at God's altar, the father of venerable age, and the young man in the prime of life, all meet on equal ground, hailing each other as brother. At his first step, the Mason has impressed upon his mind the practice of moral and social duties, his duty to his God, his neighbors, and himself, and to be, in whatever land he may dwell, a quiet and peaceable citizen. These precepts of craft masonry are more strongly enforced in the ineffable degrees, which are but an extension of the former. A considerable portion of the illustrations of craft masonry is derived from Preston's work, but all beyond the 3 degrees is for the first time presented in a consecutive form. The importance attached to the degrees under the ancient and accepted rite, as well as the Templar degree and the vast annual increase of their recipients, equally required illustration. 2 of the degrees, now a part of the ancient and accepted rite, viz. the 18th and 30th, are of long standing and for a considerable period have been practiced in England, and by the good management of the Supreme Council are now firmly established. The support which the rite receives from the highly educated brethren of the learned professions has unquestionably been a means of retaining many as active members of the fraternity who might otherwise, as their predecessors aforetime, have ceased membership of lodges. It is not to be overlooked that the teaching of the degrees in this rite that are practiced is but an expansion of that of the symbolic degrees, and that the great principles upon which our order is founded, brotherly love, relief, and truth, obtain their consummation in the cardinal virtues of faith, hope, and charity. With reference to the degrees referred to in their origin, it may be observed that the transmission of the institution, by whatever names it has borne as a secret society, is by many, and with some reason, traced from the Egyptian mysteries through Persia and Greece, thence by the Manichaeans, Paulicians, Albigenses, and troubadours to the poets of the Middle Ages, as Dante, Boccaccio, and men of science, as Porta. And in one of the earliest printed books of the continent, dated 1495, anyone who has a key to the ciphers it contains will readily see the Rose-Croix referred to. Rossetti's work on the anti-papal spirit, which produced the Reformation, throws considerable light on the secret societies of the Middle Ages. During the Middle Ages, when the light of learning was confined to the ecclesiastics, the papal power, following the system adopted by Gregory VII, of keeping the human mind in darkness, prevented as far as possible the spread of knowledge except theology and medicine. Many of these learned priests united in the study of what was termed occult philosophy, which was a search after some secret hitherto unknown, and as Rosicrucians professed to be engaged in discovering the art of transmuting metals, when in fact it was the truth of which they were in search. That they succeeded in concealing their real object is proved by their printed books, which without a key are unintelligible even now, and must have been equally so at the time of their production, when the darkness of ignorance covered the earth. The ceremonies of the secret schools were derived from the ancient mysteries of Egypt, Persia, and Greece. Dante's grand poem can only be understood by those initiated in the history of the time. It is a disguised paraphrase of the Revelation, written in the same allegorical language but applied to a political design. To the generality of readers, of course, this language is an enigma, but the very small number who can read it in its double sense and enter into the spirit of a volume which is written within and without in imitation of Ezekiel and St. John have thereby entered into the realm of spirits and can comprehend works without number which differ from each other in nothing but the title. Allegorically speaking, he who once breaks the 7 seals of this fast-closed volume may afterwards open every seal imposed by the jealous order who forged them, and enter into the knowledge of things which the wise man is not permitted to manifest openly. Apuleius, describing his initiation into the Egyptian mysteries, narrates that after he had touched the gates of death and the interior courts of the Queen of Eternal Woe, exactly Dante's case, he returned to life and then celebrated the happy day of his birth, Rossetti. Darwin, Botanic Garden, Note 22, affirms that the Eleusinian mysteries consisted of scenical exhibitions, representing and inculcating the expectation of a future life after death. Among our ancient brethren, the initiated were supposed to be born again and put on a new life. The fables, which describe Bacchus, Orpheus, Hercules, Theseus, Ulysses, and Aeneas descending into hell and then returning to earth again, appear to signify those persons were regenerate. According to the Roman system, this new life is the vita nuova of Dante. Rossetti. In a note on a character introduced in one of the mystical Italian poems called A Widow, Rossetti says that the sect of the Knights of St. John, founded by Gerard, called themselves the Sons of the Widow. The Templar degree, which for a long period has been in practice with the fraternity in England and been considered a step beyond the Royal Arch, also retains its members even when they may have relinquished attendance on craft masonry. The encampments, which are scattered wide throughout the realm, prove the encouragement given to the degrees which have a bearing on Christianity. So also the Markmaster has its illustrations drawn from the Book of the New Covenant, altogether showing that Freemasonry, like every other institution, necessarily has its coloring from age to age. The end and object of the editor is to make Freemasonry more fully understood by those who have been admitted into its temples. And should any of the outer world take it up to while away an hour, a better appreciation of the truths it promulgates may be obtained, and Freemasonry be acknowledged to be something more than a name. Rose Cottage, Blackstock Lane, Seven Sisters Road, London, N. Illustrations of Masonry. Chapter 1. On the ancient mysteries or associations analogous to Freemasonry from the earliest ages to the subversion of the Roman Empire by the Goths. Although the origin of our fraternity is clouded with darkness and its history is, to a great extent, obscure, yet we can confidently say that it is the most ancient society in the world, and we are equally certain that its principles are based on pure morality, that its ethics are the ethics of Christianity, its doctrines, the doctrines of patriotism and brotherly love, and its sentiments, the sentiments of exalted benevolence. Upon these points there can be no doubt. All that is good and kind and charitable it encourages. All that is vicious and cruel and oppressive it reprobates. Desworth Clinton, Governor of the State of New York, 1824. We're entering upon the task of endeavoring to illustrate and explain the ceremonies and symbols of Freemasonry. The author does not profess to present any novelties, but only to bring together the results of the labors of others in a clear and readable form, as a textbook for the brethren to dilate upon in their various lodges for the instruction of the younger members of the craft. In writing upon our ceremonies and mysteries, great caution must, of course, be at all times used, lest we should go too far and lay bare to those who are not members of the order, secrets only to be divulged to the brethren, and then only under circumstances well understood by Masons. The object being to illustrate the different degrees of Freemasonry, it may naturally be expected that some conjectures should be offered as to its origin. None of the ancient historians furnish us with actual testimony on this point. Oral tradition of the fraternity refers us to the Hast and traces its rise to King Solomon. But there are traces of some such institutions long before that time. The institution of Freemasonry undoubtedly must have been framed by a people who had made considerable advance in science. The Egyptians in the time of Moses were proficient in all the arts and sciences, as the gigantic works constructed in those early ages still existing prove. Their language was mystical, and their priests secured the mysteries of their religion from the knowledge of the vulgar or uninitiated by symbols and hieroglyphics comprehensible alone to those of their order. We are told that the fraternity of ancient Egypt was denominated the Hierolaiotomi, or sacred builders. They were a selected first caste and connected with the government and priesthood, being, in fact, masons of the priestly order, whilst the ordinary masons or artificers were of an inferior caste. Champollion says, "A theocracy or government of priests was the first known to the Egyptians, and it is necessary to give the word priest the acceptation that it bore in ancient times, when the ministers of religion were also the ministers of science and learning, so that they united in their own persons two of the noblest missions with which men could be invested, the worship of the deity and the cultivation of science." The intent and purpose of those stupendous fabrics, the pyramids, was a great mystery, and a mystery they still remain. All authorities who have investigated the subject concur in fixing the age of these piles at 4,000 years. Many of the works of this ancient nation now in the British Museum are of equal, if not greater age, and their execution is marvelous. Moses was initiated into the secrets and mysteries of the priestly order when in Egypt, and some have imagined that the Hebrews assisted in the construction of the pyramids. But in all probability, these wondrous efforts of Masonic skill were hoary with age when the children of Israel settled in the land of Goshen, and were emblems of sublime truths to a civilized nation when Abraham was a wanderer in the wilderness. By Egyptian colonists, according to our biblical chronology, the arts were carried to Greece 2 or 3 centuries before the age of Moses. By the Israelites, the arts of building were conveyed to the promised land, and when they became a settled people, the remembrance of the beautiful fabrics they had seen in Egypt led them to attempt constructions suited to their future home. But it is evident that by the death of their great master Moses, the Israelites were not in full possession of the knowledge requisite to complete the glorious fabric which the grand architect of the universe had, in a vision to King David, directed his son Solomon to erect. As we find by Holy Writ, that the wisest man needed the assistance of the king of Tyre. Tyre and Sidon were the chief cities of the Phoenicians. The latter boasts an antiquity anterior to any other whose site can be determined. It was a place of considerable importance in the time of Joshua, who speaks of it as Great Sidon. Hence it is evident that the Phoenicians were far advanced in the arts of life when the Israelites reached the Promised Land. Homer frequently mentions the Sidonians. All superior articles of dress, all good workmanship, and all ingenious trinkets and toys are ascribed by him to the skill and industry of the Sidonians. These people were great adepts in the sciences of their time, particularly astronomy and arithmetical calculation. The Phoenicians were an industrious people, and their cities were the emporia of commerce, commercial communities having ever been the best promoters of the arts and sciences. They have the reputation of being the inventors of scarlet and purple dyes, and the buildings of Tyre were very magnificent, the walls being 150 feet high. From this city, with materials to assist King Solomon in erecting his temple, came, by order of his sovereign master, Hiram, the widow's son. The Israelites also formed among the Chaldeans, in after intercourse, a more extensive acquaintance with one science, astronomy, than they themselves were possessed of. And this science, we all know, can only be approached by a long study of mathematical formulas. Among the most remarkable men of the early ages of the world, Zoroaster in Science and Knowledge, and Bacon says, "Knowledge is power," must have foremost rank Of Zoroaster, so called by the Greeks, or Zerdusht as the Persians render his name, the Orientalists have the most extravagant statements. His history, when divested of all extraneous matter, can be reduced to this account. He appeared in Persia or Iran about 550 BC, and with remarkable rapidity established a new faith. The ancient religion which Jamshid had established in Persia had lost its influence over the people, and new sects sprung up in every direction when Zoroaster appeared. He taught that God existed from all eternity and was alike infinity of time or space. There were, he affirmed, two principles in the universe, good and evil, the one termed Ormuzd, or the good principle, God himself, the presiding agent of all good, the other, Ahriman, the devil, the Lord of evil. God, the creator of all things, has produced light and darkness, and from the composition of these two, of generation and corruption, the composition and decomposition of the parts of the world are affected. There is an admixture of good and evil in everything created. The angels of Ormuzd sought to preserve the elements, the seasons, and the human race, which the spirits of Ahriman wished to destroy. But the power of good was eternal, and therefore must prevail. Light was the type of the good spirit, darkness of the evil spirit. Hence the Magian or Guebra, the disciple of Zoroaster, when he performs his devotions, turns to the sacred fire upon the altar, or towards the sun when in the open air, as the light by which God sheds his divine influence over the whole and perpetuates the works of creation. The principles of the ancient Magi and the adherence to fire worship are handed down to us in the Zend Avesta, which is attributed to Zoroaster. And the chief doctrine inculcated and to be noticed is the eternity and self-existence of the supreme deity, whose ineffable attributes are emphatically celebrated. Prayer is to be made to light or fire, not as being themselves deities, but as conveying the sacrifice to divine intelligence. The original purity of the religion of Zoroaster soon became corrupted, and it gradually sank into a mere idolatrous worship of the sun and fire, and driven out of Persia by the Mohammedans, fled to the mountains, and at last left the country. They finally settled in Gujarat, in Hindustan, where they are to this day. Zoroaster's fame has been transmitted to us as an astrologer and magician, and we are told that he communicated his knowledge by slow degrees. Porphyrius states that Darius was so proud of having been initiated into the mysteries of the art by Zoroaster himself that he ordered the fact to be engraven on his tomb. We are also told that Pythagoras derived his system from the Persian philosopher. There is considerable disagreement as to the era in which this philosopher flourished. Hewitt, Demonstratio Evangelica, identifies him with Moses. Abul Faraj, the celebrated Arabian historian, says he was the servant of the prophet Elijah. Abu Muhammad says he was servant to Ezra and that he foretold to his Magians the coming of the Messiah, and that at the time of his birth there should appear a wonderful star, and left a command that when that star should appear, they should follow the direction of it and go to the place and offer gifts and adoration to the child. Hyde, Veterum Passarum et Magorum Religionis Historia, refers to his being a native of Palestine and supposes him to have been Esdras. And Prideaux, who bestows considerable space to Zoroaster's history, says he is convinced he was a Jew by birth as well as religion, and that he served one of the disciples of the prophet Jeremiah, and is led to conclude it was Daniel he served. Now, as all the authorities of any value coincide in the Persian reformer being well skilled in all the learning of the East, and that he was thoroughly versed in the Jewish religion and in all the sacred writings of the Israelitish people then extant, he could have been no common man to have been possessed of all this knowledge which must have been confined to the priests and scribes. He was doubtless either carried to Babylon when an infant among other captives to the Medes, or born in their land. Daniel was taken there when very young and was early chosen to reside at the court of the sovereign. Inspiration enabled him to interpret the remarkable dream of Nebuchadnezzar, and as a reward he was made governor of Babylon and chief of the Magi. His explanation of Belshazzar's vision established his fame, and Darius the Mede promoted him above all the other governors. The envy and jealousy of persons in authority being excited by his advancement, he was thrust into a den of lions. But being found unhurt, Darius ordered him to be released and restored to his favor. Daniel remained in Persia and is supposed to have died at the capital. Benjamin of Tudela says his monument was shown to him at that place, AD 1160. The ancient Persians were fire worshippers, and Zoroaster, in reforming their religion, accomplished his object without disturbing their prejudices. The fire he preserved and derived authority for it from the law of Moses, Leviticus 9:24. His doctrine for its use was not on the same grounds as the Persians previously held. Fire is often used in the Holy Scriptures as a symbol of the deity. For the Lord thy God is a consuming fire, Deuteronomy 4:24. And God appeared to Moses in the burning bush and led the Israelites through the wilderness by pillar of fire. The sacred fire on the altar was kept perpetually burning by God's command. And therefore it would be just as reasonable to charge the ancient Hebrews as being worshippers of fire as the ancient Persians, because they kept it burning in their temples. With reference to the next point in the religious system propounded to the Persians, we may remark that when the prophet Isaiah, chapter 11, 6-7, in speaking of Cyrus and God's charge to that monarch, says, "I am the Lord, and there is none else. I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil." This is quite consistent with what Zoroaster taught. We have no right to make any observations on what fire worship was before his time, or how it has become corrupted since. We think there is the strongest evidence that this great philosopher taught only that which the law of Moses sanctioned, and that he was possessed of some authority to enable him to propagate his faith. He did not urge his religion by the sword as Muhammad did, and hence we may ask, what was his position? A mean man he could not be, and we venture to suggest he could be no other than the prophet Daniel. We have been thus discursive, as many writers on Freemasonry point to Persia and the Magian religion for its origin, and numerous illustrations are brought forward in proof. All difficulty, we think, is cleared away, and its derivation from the Israelites is established. And this was part of the mysteries of the Magians, and which they dispersed throughout the world. Mohammedanism being the state religion of Persia, there are but few followers of the ancient religion in that country. At Bombay, the Parsis, as they are designated in India, are a rich and powerful class, and they are proprietors of the greater part of the island. They are generous and splendid in the higher orders, and in the lower ranks of life, industrious and intelligent, in both surpassing Hindus or Mohammedans. It is also worthy of remark that their private conduct in all relations of life is such as to cause a blush on the Englishman's face, when the immoral and irreligious habits of his own countrymen are contrasted with those of the Parsis. It is some testimony for the simple faith taught by Zoroaster that after 24 centuries, his followers are the most peaceable, most orderly, and most humane among the subjects of the British Crown in India. The truly Masonic virtues of charity and beneficence are their constant practice. Many Parsis are numbered among the fraternity. Rossetti, in his disquisitions on the anti-papal spirit of the secret societies that produced the Reformation, traces the institution of Freemasonry to the ancient mysteries of Persia. Mani, who was a native of that country and well acquainted with the doctrines and secret practices of the Magi, attempted to amalgamate the Persian religion with Christianity. For this he was put to death by the king. It is not certain at what date he lived, but his doctrines were introduced into Europe in the 3rd century. The Manichaeans believed, like the Magi, in two eternal principles from which all things proceed, namely light and darkness, which are respectively subject to the dominion of two beings, one the God of good, and the other the God of evil. They also believed that the first parents of the human race were created by the God of darkness, with corrupt and mortal bodies, but that their souls formed part of that eternal light which was subject to the God of light. They maintained that it was the great object of the government of the God of light to deliver the captive souls of men from their corporeal prisons, and that with this view he created two sublime beings, Christ and the Holy Spirit, and sent Christ into the world, clothed with the shadowy form of a human body, and not with the real substance, to teach mortals how to deliver the rational soul from the corrupt body and to overcome the power of malignant matter. They believed that Mani was the comforter whom Jesus promises should lead them into all truth. They denied the doctrine of the resurrection and rejected the authority of the Old Testament. And Mani asserted that the books of the New Testament were interpolated and falsified. The disciples of Mani were divided into two classes, one of which was called the elect and the other hearers. The former were bound to abstain from animal food, wine, and all sensual enjoyments. The latter were not bound to these severities. The ecclesiastical constitution consisted of 12 apostles and a president who represented Christ, 72 bishops who represented the 72 disciples of Christ. They had also presbyters and deacons. The Paulicians, a branch of the Manichaeans, appeared in the 7th century in Armenia and derived their name from Paul, their teacher. They were protected by the Emperor Constantine, and in the 11th and 12th centuries spread their doctrines over France and Italy. Among the eminent Greek philosophers who were impressed with the advanced state of knowledge to which the Egyptians and others had arrived, we may especially notice Pythagoras, who flourished some 600 years BC. For we find that he visited those countries, gained the confidence of the priests, and learned from them the symbolic language by which their proceedings were guarded, which at the same time concealed the artful policy by which they governed princes as well as people. On his way to Egypt, he visited Phoenicia and was initiated by the priests into their mysteries. He also visited the noted cities of Greece, and after an absence of many years settled at Crotona and taught his doctrines. According to Aristotle, the Pythagoreans were the first who determined anything in moral philosophy. Their ethics were of the loftiest and most spiritual description. Virtue was with them a harmony, unity, and an endeavor to resemble the deity. The whole life of man should be an attempt to represent on earth the beauty and harmony displayed in the order of the universe. The mind should have the body and passions under perfect control. The gods should be worshipped by simple purifications, offerings, and above all, by sincerity and purity of heart. From Diogenes Laertius we learn that the society was at once philosophical, a religious brotherhood, and a political association, whose proceedings were transacted in the greatest secrecy, perhaps more on account of the religious doctrines inculcated than of its political principles. Religion indeed seems to have been the foundation of the society. Pythagoras instituted among his disciples secret worship or mysteries, and they were also taught the science of numbers, geometry, and music. The various discoveries in mathematics, music, and astronomy that are ascribed to Pythagoras are proofs of the mighty impression which he made on his contemporaries, as well as on after ages. From the great respect which he paid to geometry, all Masons have ever hailed him as an ancient brother, and certainly his system is a close approximation to the science of Freemasonry. He is said to have been instructed in the sacred things of the Hebrews by either Daniel or Ezekiel during the Babylonish captivity. The symbols adopted by Pythagoras in his secret instruction are said to have been principally derived from geometry. Among them may be noticed what are sometimes termed the 5 Platonic bodies, viz. The right angle, an emblem of morality and justice; the equilateral triangle, a symbol of God, the essence of light and truth; the square, an emblem of the divine mind; the cube, the symbol of the mind of man; and the dodecahedron, a symbol of the universe. The institutions of this great philosopher resembled the Masonic system in many respects. His assemblies were arranged due east and west because, he said, motion began in the east and proceeded to the west. He adopted a system of signs whereby his disciples, dispersed through various countries, made themselves known to each other at first sight, and became as familiar at their first interview as if they had been acquainted from their birth. And so closely, says Iamblichus, were their interests united, that many of them passed over seas and risked their fortune to re-establish that of one of their brethren who had fallen into distress. Various aphorisms and pointed replies are ascribed to Pythagoras, as we learn from Diogenes Laertius, such as the following: What is the most ancient of beings? God, for he is uncreated. What the most beautiful? The universe, for it is the work of God. What the most extensive? Space, for it contains all things. What the most rapid wind, for it traverses all things. What the most powerful necessity, for it prevails over all things. How shall we live most virtuously and justly, if we refuse to do ourselves what we reprehend in others? Who is happy? He who possesses a sound body, competence of fortune, and a mind disposed to receive instruction. Toland says, the Pythagorean philosophers concealed their sentiments of the nature of things under the veil of divine allegories, lest being accused of impiety by the priests, which often happened, they might be exposed in their turn to the hatred, if not the fury, of the vulgar. We do not deem it necessary in this place to institute an inquiry into the Eleusinian mysteries, or to any extent the Dionysia. We find that a colony of Greeks from Attica settled in Asia Minor and united the district under the name of Ionia, where they introduced the mysteries of Dionysia as they existed before they were corrupted by the Athenians. We are indebted to these Dionysian artificers, an association which possessed the exclusive privilege of erecting temples, theatres, etc., for many splendid buildings, including the magnificent temple at Teos. This Ionic fraternity had words and signs by which they could recognize each other, and like Freemasons, they were divided into lodges, which were distinguished by different appellations. As the Dionysia were instituted 400 years before Solomon's time, we have every right to maintain the tradition of our order, that it flourished at the building of the temple. Josephus tells us that the Grecian style of architecture was that adopted in building the temple, and it may be inferred that these Dionysiac masons assisted in raising that magnificent fabric. In the disastrous wars of the Jews before and during the captivity, all social order must have been destroyed, and hence we have no distinct account of either the origin or organization of the community of the Essenes, whose life and practice present many similarities to Freemasonry. The Essenes, in spite of continued persecution, sustained an existence until the 5th century of the present era, in which age they fell, with other ancient institutions, on the subversion of the Roman Empire by the Goths. Josephus in his youth passed some time among the Essenes, and he tells us they lived in perfect union. They do not marry, but bring up other men's children as if they were their own, and infuse into them very early their own spirit and maxims. All who desired admittance into the sect were subjected to a year's probation, and then, after 2 or more years of trial, were allowed to make a profession to observe the laws of the society and by solemn oaths preserve the secrets. Besides the laws of piety, justice, and modesty, they vowed fidelity to God and loyalty to their sovereign. Philo informs us that they sent gifts to the temple but never offered sacrifices. They held the scriptures in the greatest reverence, but considered them as mystic writings and explained them allegorically. They possessed sacred books which explained their peculiar doctrines and practices. They had all things in common, ate at a common table, and were exceedingly abstemious. They were divided into 4 classes according to the time of their initiation. They admitted no one to their society till after a probation of 3 years. Those who were admitted had to take solemn oaths that they would worship God and be just to their fellow creatures, to speak the truth, and never disclose the secrets and mysteries of their order. Their studies were the laws of Moses, whom next to God they held in the greatest reverence. They very much used symbols, allegories, and parables after the manner of the ancients. Mr. Charles Taylor, in his edition of Calmet's Dictionary of the Bible, remarks that it is surprising commentators and divines make no reference to these peculiarities in the character, manner, and principles of the Jewish sect of the Essenes, and by inference expresses an opinion that John the Baptist belonged to the community. Suidas and some others are of opinion that the Essenes were a branch of the Rechabites, while others take them to be the Chasdim of the Psalms and Assadeans of the Maccabees. The charitable and peaceful disposition of this community, as well as the 3 fundamental maxims of their morality, being the love of God, of virtue, and of their neighbor, and in addition that they were a secret society, leads to the belief that it was a fraternity of a like character to Freemasonry. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.